Sports day was only 2 hours away and Greenview Primary buzzed like an overturned beehive. Out on the field, teachers were knotting the last ribbons onto the finish line, while parents unfolded mats beneath the flame of the forest trees. Inside the cool, quiet hall, however, something was very wrong. The glass display cabinet by the main doors, the one that held the school's proudest treasure, the gleaming gold champions medal won at last year's national meet, stood with its little door swinging open. The velvet cushion inside lay bare. The medal was gone. Mr. Rajan, the sports teacher, pressed both hands to his head as if it might fall off. The medal was meant to be presented to this year's winners at noon. Word raced through the corridors faster than any sprinter, and a small, anxious crowd of pupils gathered, whispering. Among them stood May, a slight primary 4 girl with sharp, watchful eyes, who said nothing at all but began very quietly to look. It did not take long for the whispers to find a target. Arjun, a tall, quiet boy from the other primary 4 class, had been seen near the hall earlier that morning, and everybody knew he had come second in last year's race, beaten by the very team whose medal now sat in that cabinet.
He was always jealous. He probably took it so nobody else could have it.
Heads nodded. The story spread and hardened, the way wet sand sets firm in the sun, until it began to feel less like a guess and more like a fact. Arjun stood at the edge of the crowd, his face pale, his hands jammed deep in his pockets. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again, for what could he say against so many certain faces? May watched him, then watched the cabinet, and a small crease appeared between her eyebrows. She did not like how quickly everyone had decided. While the others argued, May knelt down by the open cabinet and studied it the way a doctor studies a patient. She had read every detective story in the school library twice over, and she knew that a room always remembers what has happened in it. If only you ask the right questions. The first thing she noticed was the door itself. It had not been forced. The little brass lock was undamaged, and the tiny key still hung on its hook beside the frame, exactly where Mr. Rajan always left it. So whoever opened the cabinet had not broken in. They had simply used the key, which meant they knew where it was kept. Next, she looked at the floor. There, pressed faintly into the polished tiles just below the cabinet, was a footprint of dried reddish mud, far too small to belong to any primary 4 pupil. May's heart gave a quick, excited thump. Already the careless story the others were telling did not fit the quiet evidence in front of her. followed the trail of faint reddish smudges with her eyes. The little footprints did not lead towards the main doors where Arjun had been standing. Instead, they wandered crookedly across the hall towards the far side, where a row of tall windows looked out onto the garden. One of those windows, she saw at once, had been propped open with a wooden ruler, leaving a gap just wide enough for a small child to wriggle through. Beneath it, on the dusty sill, lay a single crumpled sweet wrapper, bright orange and printed with a cartoon tiger, the sort given out, she happened to know, only at the kindergarten next door. May picked it up between two careful fingers and turned it over thoughtfully. A child small enough to leave those prints. A window propped open from the inside. A suite from the kindergarten. One by one, the clues were lining up like beads on a string, and not a single one of them pointed to Arjun. May carried her small handful of clues back to Mr. Rajan, who was still wringing his hands by the empty cabinet.
Sir, may I ask you some questions?
He blinked down at her, surprised, but nodded.
Has the cabinet door been sticking lately?
Why, yeah, yes, the catch is loose. It swings open on its own if you don't press it firmly. I keep meaning to fix it.
May nodded slowly, tucking the answer away.
And the window over there, sir. Who uses this hall in the early morning before assembly?
Only the little ones from the kindergarten sometimes. They cut through here on rainy mornings to reach their classroom.
May's eyes brightened. Each answer was a small key, and each small key opened another door in her mind. She was no longer guessing at all. She was reasoning step by patient step towards something that was beginning to look very much like the truth. Now, May did something none of the shouting pupils had thought to do. She checked the time. On the wall above the cabinet hung the big hall clock, and beside it a smaller notice board pinned with the morning schedule. The kindergarten children, the schedule said, walked through the hall at 7:30, before the Greenview pupils even arrived. Mr. Rajan confirmed he had last seen the medal safely in place at 7 o'clock, when he opened up. Yet by 8, when assembly began and the first pupils filed in, it was already gone. That left a single, quiet half hour, 7:30 to 8, when only the little ones from next door had passed through the empty hall. Arjun, May now remembered clearly, had been at the school gate at that exact time, helping his younger sister with her shoelaces. At least a dozen parents had seen him there. The very window of time in which the medal vanished was the one window in which Arjun could not possibly have been inside. May stood very still in the middle of the hall and let all the clues settle in her mind like leaves drifting to the bottom of a pond until the water turned clear. The cabinet had not been broken into. Its catch was loose and could drift open by itself or be opened by anyone who nudged it. The footprints were tiny, far smaller than her own. The trail led not to the main doors but to a window propped from the inside, a window the kindergarten children used. There was a sweet wrapper from their classroom, and the metal had gone missing in the 1/2 hour when only those little ones were about. None of it, not one single thread of it, led to Arjun. Yet the crowd had stitched him into the story for no better reason than that he was tall, quiet, and had once finished second. May felt a hot flicker of anger on his behalf.
They didn't look, they just decided.
There was one piece of the puzzle May still could not place. If a small child from the kindergarten had taken the medal, why would they have done it? Children that age did not care about national meets or champions. They cared about cartoons and snacks and shiny things. Shiny things. May turned the word over. A medal was, above all else, a beautiful, glittering, golden, shiny thing. Exactly the sort of object a small child might be drawn to, the way a magpie is drawn to a button. Perhaps it had not been a theft at all, in the way the others meant the word. Perhaps no one had set out to do anything wrong. To be sure, though, she would have to follow the trail to its very end, through that propped open window and into the garden beyond, where the reddish mud had surely come from. May tucked the orange wrapper into her pocket like a detective filing away her first real lead and set off across the hall. May eased the propped window wider and climbed out into the garden, landing softly on a strip of wet, reddish earth that bordered the school's vegetable patch. At once she understood where the muddy footprints had come from. There, pressed into the soft soil, were more of those same small prints, leading away in a wandering line towards the low green fence that separated Greenview from the kindergarten. She crouched and followed them, feeling more like a true detective with every step. Halfway along, the prints stopped beside a clump of bushes, circled about as though their owner had paused there and then carried on. Caught on a thorn at exactly that spot, fluttering like a tiny flag, was a thread of bright yellow wool. May knew that wool. The kindergarten children all wore little knitted cardigans in cheerful colors, and yellow was the color worn by the very youngest class of all, the 4-year-olds. May climbed carefully over the low fence and found herself in the kindergarten's little play garden, all painted tires and plastic slides. A kindly teacher with flower-white hair looked up in surprise.
You're from the big school. Has something happened?
May explained, as calmly and clearly as she could, about the missing medal and the trail of clues that had led her there. The teacher's eyes widened, and then, slowly, a look of understanding spread across her face.
Oh dear, I think I know exactly who you mean.
She led May to a quiet corner of the playroom, where a tiny boy of about 4 sat cross-legged on a rug, utterly absorbed in his task. He had a soft yellow cloth in one hand, and he was rubbing at something cupped in his lap, his small tongue poking out in concentration. It was the medal, whole, unharmed, and polished until it shone like a little sun. The little boy looked up at May with round, untroubled eyes. He was not the slightest bit ashamed, because he did not understand that he had done anything wrong. In his soft, piping voice, he explained it all quite happily. He had walked through the big hall that morning, the way he always did on rainy days, and he had seen the golden medal sitting behind the glass. The little door had been hanging open all by itself. The medal was so shiny. But, he said with a serious frown, it had a smudge on it. A horrible, dirty smudge. So he had taken it home through the window to clean it properly, the way his ama cleaned the brass pot at Chinese New Year, because surely something so beautiful ought to be looked after. He had meant, he insisted, to bring it back all nice and gleaming. May felt her chest fill with a warm, complicated feeling. There had been no villain in this story after all. Only a small boy who thought a shiny thing deserved to be cared for. The kindergarten teacher knelt down to the boy's level and explained very gently that the medal belonged to the big school and that taking things, even to be kind to them, could make people very worried. The little boy's lip wobbled, and for a moment May feared he might cry. Then the teacher smoothed his hair and praised the careful job he had done, and soon he was smiling shyly again, holding the gleaming medal out to May in both hands like an offering.
It's the shiniest it has ever been.
As she carried the medal back over the fence, cradling it as carefully as he had, she thought about how close everyone at Greenview had come to blaming Arjun for the work of a 4-year-old with a polishing cloth. The truth had been waiting quietly in a sunny playroom the whole time, but only for someone willing to follow the clues instead of the crowd. Back in the hall, the crowd was still muttering, and Arjun still stood apart, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of everyone's certainty were pressing down on him. May walked straight into the middle of the room and held the medal high, where the light from the windows caught it and threw a bright golden coin of reflection onto the ceiling. A gasp went round, then a hush.
It was never stolen. And it was never Arjun.
Quietly, plainly, without any showing off, she laid out the trail exactly as she had followed it. The loose catch, the small muddy footprints, the propped window, the orange wrapper, the half hour when only the little ones passed through, the thread of yellow wool, and at the end of it all, a 4-year-old polishing a shiny treasure he thought deserved to gleam. With every clue she described, more heads turned towards Arjun, and the look on those faces slowly changed from suspicion to something far more uncomfortable: shame. The girl who had spoken loudest against Arjun went very red and stared hard at her shoes. One by one, others began to mumble apologies, the words awkward and small in their mouths. Arjun lifted his head at last, and the color came slowly back into his face.
I kept telling you it wasn't me. You just didn't want to listen.
There was nothing anyone could say to that, because it was simply true. May crossed the hall and stood beside him, and pressed the gleaming medal into Mr. Rajan's hands just in time for the ceremony.
Thank you.
I didn't do anything clever. I only looked at what was actually there instead of what everyone wanted to believe.
In its way, she understood. That was the whole of it, the entire difference between a guess and the truth. At noon, the medal was presented exactly as planned, gleaming more brightly than it had in years, and not one person in the cheering crowd guessed why. Mr. Rajan fixed the loose catch on the cabinet that very afternoon, and he made a point of thanking May in front of the whole school, though she went pink and wished he wouldn't. As for the little boy, the two schools agreed there was no harm done, and certainly no wickedness. He was simply taken back to his sunny playroom, none the wiser, already busy polishing a plastic spoon instead. Yet the part May remembered longest was none of that. It was Arjun, who found her by the field afterwards and sat down beside her on the grass. They did not say very much. They watched the races together as the afternoon turned gold. Two quiet people who had each learned in their own way that being looked at carefully is one of the kindest things in the world, and being looked at carelessly, one of the cruelest. That evening, May wrote the whole adventure into the little notebook she kept for exactly such things, ending it with a line she underlined twice. A clue does not care what you already believe. It was, she thought, the most important thing the case had taught her. The crowd had begun with their answer, Arjun, and then looked only for reasons to keep it. May had begun instead with the quiet things in front of her, the footprint and the wrapper and the open window, and let them lead her wherever they truly went, even when that was somewhere surprising. Anyone, she realized, could point a finger. It took no skill and no courage at all. To hold back that finger, however, to kneel down and look closely, to ask patient questions and follow the evidence to its honest end, that was the real work, and the only work that ever found the truth. She closed her notebook, switched off her lamp, and fell asleep feeling, for the first time, very much like a detective indeed.